instructor way back at OCS told me, this is not about you. And that's really what made sense for me. And so that kind of sustained me through the first deployment, and also is the reason why, I said yes to going back a second time when I had a choice to go to Okinawa, Japan. And there was a call at the last minute about 2 days before our flight where they said that the division, 1st Marine Division, needed infantry officers to go live with Iraqis to teach them tactics. And I said, all right, sure, I'll go. When are we leaving?
Yeah.
They said 2 months.
Phil,
and
Phil, I want to take you back.
I
want to take you back for a second because I know a little bit about where this story's going. Let's, and I appreciate you sharing about the emotions, because I think that oftentimes gets overlooked when we hear a story about somebody, whether it's in a professional career and or if it's their service in the military, is that the actions that you've taken over your career all have emotions behind them. And I think it's important to understand that and how to deal with them. And I also think what's fascinating is oftentimes as leaders, we say things that might come out easily for us, but passionately. And we have to understand that sometimes those resonate with people for their life, like that officer pointing out those young soldiers that you're going to be responsible for them. And here, what might have been just in a moment for him to say that has stuck with you for your entire life. And so I want to go back when you talked about, without question, you raised your hand to go take a platoon of men over to fill the gap. Tell us about that story and what happened. You raised your hand without hesitation to say, yeah, I'll go. What were the outcomes of that, and where did you spend the next coming months or years or whatever it turned out to be?
Well, so it certainly changed my mindset. I mean, at that time, of course, we're training infantry officer course. We're training to become infantry officers. So there's always it's all in the context of, applied organizational violence, interpersonal violence. You're going to be a combat leader. But then, before that, I was signed up for a battalion that wasn't going to actually go to combat. So I was like, you kind of have a different, not that you're complacent, but a little bit.
Yeah.
Right. That. And then, saying, look, I'll go. And then all the training that we did after that. So I had to finish IOC, infantry officer course, and then make my way out to Camp Pendleton to meet my Marines at 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines before we all flew over. And it kind of brought the training to a little bit more of a focus where it's like, this actually counts. Like, this is my last chance to do it in the schoolhouse.
Yeah.
Because after this, it's going to be real. And it's tough when it's real. And so, my headspace at that time was like, all right, I need to get, I was a serious, officer student, if you want to call it that, but this kind of brought a different level of earnestness to it. It was like, this is,
people can die.
You screw this up, there's going to be a consequence. Yeah, people die, and they do. And look, man, like I said, I've gotten away with some decisions where, you have a bias for action is what you're taught. Have a bias for action. And there's certain circumstances we encountered where it was like, look, we just got to do this right now. And stuff was dangerous beyond belief. And we got away with it. We got away with it. And it could have easily gone the other way, but you just have to, that sort of fortitude in the deep within your intestines to say, I'm confident in the decision that I'm making. We're just going to do it. We're going to do it as aggressively as possible. And that's how we're going to make it. And sometimes, the coin flips your way. Certain things that the enemy has to do, he doesn't do. And then that's how you end up kind of pulling off these things where you look back on it, 14 years later, and it makes you laugh. When at the time it really doesn't. So, it just seemed, it was natural to me. And look, I by no means am I the kind of person who would crow about, anything. I just thought, putting my hand in the air to say, I'll go. it made sense. It's like, yeah, this is what I signed up for anyhow. And, one of the other guys in our group, had just had his first kid. And I was like, well, I don't want him going. I mean, I didn't have kids at the time. I got kids now, but
yeah.
So I could kind of see where it was like, it was a little bit for him. It was also, a little bit of like, this is what I ought to be doing anyways. And it was the same with volunteering for the second deployment, where it was like, yeah, look, I mean, we're still in a war, and if in the second phase, I'm not, doing so much of the active fighting, but I ended up living on the Syrian border, for about 14 months, with Iraqi national police officers trying to, besides bridging cultural and political gaps, trying to get some semblance of an organized security force to watch that western border, which is just it's not even a line in the sand. I mean, it's just kind of like a arbitrary marker. You better have your GPS handy, or else you're going to walk your way into another country. So it makes sense to me. Where it's like, look, maybe I got more to give now to this other country to help them get incrementally better,
Yeah.
Like just one step at a time. Cause we saw on our, and this is just like a life lesson to apply, generally, because I approach, kind of my life after the Marine Corps. I didn't really get out of that mindset of, like you just got to keep pushing it forward, and little by little you're going to turn things around. So that's what we did in Ramadi. Little by little we turned it around and got it better. And then the battalion that came in after us did the same thing. And it got to a point where, after I had gotten out of the Marines in 2007, I read a story about a Marine battalion doing like a fun run with Iraqi police in Ramadi, in tennis shoes and shorts, on a main strip of the main supply route through that city, which when I was there, you were guaranteed to hit an improvised explosive device.
Yeah.
So you could see that there's improvement, and that's just by, and I've heard other guests on your show talk about this, and it really is true. It's just by hard work. You got to, whatever you want to look at as an analogy, filling sandbags, chopping wood, you got to do the thing that's in front of you first, and do it, finish it, move on to the next one, and keep that going. And, that's certainly something I brought away with me from serving in the Marines, and, what I even apply to now, which is not nearly as dangerous as what I used to do.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking at a picture you posted on Instagram. It's a throwback, and you guys are pulling out an EOD or an IED back in January of 2005. I'm going, oh my gosh, life is definitely different now. You're not digging those out of the ground.
No, I'm not digging those out of the ground. No, I'm more, I write motions and I argue at hearings. So I practice law in San Francisco, and it's mostly constitutional law. And so it's much, much different than, that pulling those IEDs out of the ground back in January 2005. But that's an example of like one of those, one of those you get away with just by being faster and more aggressive, by saying, all right, this is what we're going to do. And, having that bias for action, which I think it's funny. It fits, I think, a lot with your, theme of answers. Yes.
Yeah.
Not every time that I've practiced a bias for action, or sort of that, the quick decision making, it hasn't always paid off. You got to allow yourself to make some mistakes. I know that in the both in the Marines and outside the Marines, I've made some decisions that I thought were good at the time that ended up not being very good at all. And you got to be able to kind of pick up the pieces and push on. And it's funny you mentioned that on Instagram, because I decided I wanted to write about my experiences in Iraq, but from a standpoint of, are there combat lessons that can be applied to everyday life, and as far as a self-help motivational thing. So I sat down and started writing it, and for those who practice law, when you're billing hours, that it's really hard to have any spare time to do anything in life. So
yeah, I
gutted through it in about a 2-month period by writing, burning the candle at both ends. And then I thought, well, look, if I put this on Instagram, not that I have a ton of people looking at that, but I'd make a public statement that I'm going to release a book, then I'll do it. Right. Because otherwise I just procrastinate and not get it done. So, a lot of the stuff we're talking about now, I've put together in what I want to call the warrior manual, which is distilling those lessons from combat and saying, could you apply this to everyday life? Because that's what I did.
Yeah.
And so it actually has been kind of fun.
Phil, I could listen to your stories all day and learn about how you've served our country and the situation you've been in. I realize we don't have all day. You alluded to serving a second tour, and I know that you took a little time off after that, and technically you kind of did a third tour. Can you just give us an overview of your military, complete in totality, what you served, and then when you left the military, what you went off and did after that? You mentioned being a litigator. Can you just give us a brief overview of that, please?
Sure. Yeah. So I served 4 years of active duty in the United States Marine Corps as an infantry platoon commander. I served my first combat tour was to Ramadi, Iraq, from about August of 2004 to March 2005. And I came back to Camp Pendleton. I picked up a weapons company platoon. We're called Cat 1, Combined Anti-Armor Team 1. Trained with those guys. We trained up to do the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit, which is a tour including a sea tour to Okinawa and some other places in the Pacific. I hopped off that at the last minute and took a position with the transition teams assigned to the Syrian border in Al-Walid and Al-Husayba, which are the south and north, respectively, ports of entry into Syria, and just lived as a embedded advisor with some Iraqi National Police units out there. Came home briefly for 2 weeks. I forget when. I think it was sometime in the summer of 2006, and then went back again, did the same thing, and then got out because I figured there was other stuff I wanted to experience, and so oddly enough, I taught high school. That was my first job out of the Marine Corps. I taught sophomores at an all-boys Catholic school in San Francisco. I taught them advanced placement world history and geography. And that was a lot of fun. Actually, teaching is a real passion of mine, but I couldn't afford my rent. So
not up there.
Yeah, not up there, man. Oh, it's gotten worse since. But and I started working at a manufacturing company in Petaluma, which is Northern California, and doing some interesting things and being allowed to learn about how things are made. And then I kind of got a little bit of the bug of, well, I got this GI Bill, what should I use it for? And I was thinking about getting a master's in history, but then I was like, well, I saw some stuff in Iraq that was the most heartbreaking of it was that you got folks who there's just no guarantee of the process, right? Or society is completely broken down, and it's like, all the things that you and I and everyone in this country, we take for granted.